I'd like to say that if any of you have watched the news or read the paper or even listened to the speeches given today, I'm sure that you know that healthcare is a huge hot topic right now in politics. And so Obama is talking about universal healthcare, and McCain is saying, let's give everyone $5,000 and they can buy their own healthcare. Well, guess what? None of that matters if we don't have doctors' offices or hospitals to go to. So if there aren't architects to design the facilities, then none of that matters. To give you a little background on architecture, to become an architect nationwide, you must first get a degree from one of the 7 accredited schools in California. Now that's if you want to be an architect in California. And there's only 7 to choose from. And then after that, after you graduate, that doesn't mean you're an architect. You still have to pass the ARE, which is the architect registration exam. And then not until you've passed that will you be considered a licensed architect and have any authority to be designing any buildings. So my major claim is that the inability to accept a sufficient amount of students to California architecture schools will result in a significant decrease in the quality and quantity of our state's buildings. So the reasons for this is that the number of architects becoming licensed in the state of California is rapidly decreasing. Secondly, universities just aren't admitting enough students to their programs. And thirdly, we need architects in order for our society's buildings to, be maintained and continue to grow. So let's go back to my first point when I said that the number of architects is rapidly decreasing in California. The 2005 architectural record reported that in 1989, there were 1,339 licenses issued. So that means over 1,000 people were becoming a licensed architect, new architect, just in that year alone. In 2004, there were only 398 people becoming licensed. That's a 60% decline. Now that doesn't mean, oh, now we don't need as many architects, like the need isn't as great anymore. Because buildings have a lifespan, so you constantly need to rebuild buildings. Like here at our own school buildings are falling apart, the CLA building. So why is this? Are people just not interested in architecture anymore? Well, that's not the case. Because my second point is that, again, that universities are not admitting enough students. Matthew Arnold, an architect and a member of the AIA, did a whole report on architecture schools and people becoming licensed architects. And he found that in 2005, 3,593 students applied to architecture. So there's tons of students who wanted to get into this program. Now that same year, only 925 were accepted. So that means 75% of the students who wanted to be architects were rejected. And that's not because they weren't qualified, they didn't have the grades, it's simply they just didn't have room in their program. I have a personal example. I actually applied for architecture here at Cal Poly Pomona, which is one of the few accredited schools in California. And I got a letter back saying that over 2,000 students had applied and only 100 were being accepted. And so I would be put on a waiting list of 200. So they had said, this isn't because you're not qualified, you don't have the grades, and we don't think that you're capable of being in the program. It's just we have this number of students that we're letting in, and you don't fall into those numbers. So it's interesting if you look at it this way. In 2005, or let's go back to my last point when I said that in 1989, there were over 1,000 students becoming licensed architects. Well, in 2005, not even that many were given the opportunity to be educated on architecture. So there's no way to catch up if people aren't just given the opportunity. And once Okay, so 925 were accepted into the program. Well, obviously not that many end up becoming architects. Actually, only 326 go on to graduate, so that's 10% of those who applied. And then, just because you graduate doesn't mean you're an architect. You still have to go on to pass the test, which makes that number even less. My third point is that if this continues, the built environment is going to deteriorate. According to the 2005 architectural record, there are more architects dying than are becoming registered in the state of California. So if more people are dying than becoming architects, obviously we know realistically it's not like we're going to reach zero and there's not going to be any architects, but we're going to level out at a very low number of practicing architects. And if architects are required for hospitals and schools and all these important buildings that we use on a day-to-day basis, what's going to happen when the demand is so high that they can't take time to make to design a quality building because there's so much that needs to be done, and there's no way that they're going to keep up with the demand. So as we can see, it's pretty evident that licensed architects is rapidly decreasing. The universities are failing to admit a sufficient amount of students, and that if we don't have enough architects, our buildings all around us that we're using every day are going to suffer, and that's going to affect us. So we can say that the inability to accept a sufficient amount of students at architectural schools will result in a decrease in quality and quantity of our state's buildings. So it doesn't matter how much money we have or what great health service we have, if there aren't buildings to use for, medical and school, then none of that matters. Thank you.